Welcome to Parshat Devarim. So, it's Shabbos morning. You're walking home from synagogue, and your friend Sam runs up to you and says, "Ah, I slept through Torah reading this morning. Can you give me a Sam says, "Those seem a little random. But sum it up for me. Like, what was the speech actually about?" And then you realize you don't really know. You know the stories Moses brings up, but you're not exactly sure why. Is Moses just giving a history lesson of the nation in the desert? Probably not, right? Because if it were, he would have told the big stories and not this seemingly random collection. Or maybe it's just an inspirational speech for the people of Israel. But the stories he picks don't seem particularly inspirational. No one is going to put, "Remember how we avoided the land of Seir," on an inspirational poster anytime soon. So what is this introduction to the epic speech of Devarim really about? This week on the Parsha Experiment. Hi, I'm Imu Shalev, and welcome to the Parsha Experiment. Let's take a deeper look at the 4 stories Moses mentions, and maybe that will give us an insight into what his speech is actually about. Let's start with the most well-known story of the Israelites' time in the desert, the sin of the spies. Spies went to Israel to scout the land, and when they returned, they reported how strong the Canaanite nations were. The people were terrified and lost their resolve. Moses recounts what he told them. Lo ta'artzun velo tir'un mehem. Don't be afraid, God will fight for you, just as he did in Egypt and in the entire time in the desert, like a father carrying his son. But that's not how the story happened. Back in Shlach, after the spies gave a negative report and the people lost resolve, Vayipol Moshe v'Aaron al pneihem. Moses and Aaron fell on their faces. Moses is silent. He doesn't say a thing. And then Caleb and Joshua, 2 of the spies, stepped forward. They rip their clothes, karu bigdehem, and give a whole speech. It will be great in the land. Al tira'um, don't be afraid. What kind of history lesson is this? Back in Shlach, Moses was completely silent, while Joshua and Caleb give the nation an encouraging speech. But in Moses' retelling, he's the one giving the speech. Did he just want to give himself the credit? What's with these changes? And why does Moses bring up this story in the first place? Does he not remember that the sin of the spies is the biggest failure in Israel's national history? This is the reason the nation didn't enter the land 40 years ago. Wouldn't this just bring up their deepest insecurities, make them feel like they might fail again? What's going on here? Now, let's look at the next story Moses tells in his speech. Moses says that God told me, Atem ovrim bigvul achechem b'nei Esav hayoshvim b'seir. You are about to pass the border of your brothers, the children of Esav, who dwell in Seir. Al titgarubam, ki lo etein lachem eretzam. Do not contend with them, because I am not giving you their land. Why not? Ki Yerusha le'Esav natati es har Seir. Because I give this land as an inheritance to Esav. And Moses continues, God said the same about Moab and Ammon. Don't contend with them. Ki lo etein lacha me'eretzo. I'm not giving you that land. Ki livnei Lot natati es ar Yerusha. Because I gave them as an inheritance to Lot. Inheritance for Esav and Lot? I don't get it. Why do we hear about any of this? Moses even goes into excruciating detail about how Esav and Lot's descendants took hold of these lands. Before Esav, Horites dwelt in Seir. Esav destroyed them and settled there. And before Lot's children go to Moab and Ammon, Rephaim lived there. Am gadol v'rav aram, a nation of giants. Vayashmidem Hashem mipneihem, vayirashum vayishvu tachtam. God destroyed those giants, and Lot's children took over. I thought we finished talking about Esav and Lot back in Genesis. Why is the Torah randomly bringing them up again, telling us that we're avoiding their lands? And not only that, why is this story even important enough to be included in Moses' speech? This story doesn't even appear earlier in the 4 books of Moses. And now it's told brand new in this speech. Why? The next story Moses talks about is Israel's defeat of the mighty Amorite kingdoms of Sichon and Og. Moses says, Vayetze Sichon likratenu hu v'chol amo. Sichon came to battle with his entire nation. And yet, Vayitneu Hashem Elokeinu lifanenu. God delivered him into our hands. We destroyed the people and their cities. Lo hisharnu sarid. Not a thing remained. And then, the same thing happened with Og. Vayetze Og melech habashan likratenu hu v'chol amo. Og came to initiate a battle, but Moses told the nation, Vayomer Hashem Elai al tiraoto. God said to me, do not fear him. And we destroyed him, just as we did Sichon. And we're given so much detail. Hine arso eres barzel. Og's bed, it was made out of iron. Tesha amot arka ve'arba amot rachba. It was 9 cubits long by 4 cubits wide. That's about 13.5 feet by 6 feet. That's huge. A bed made for a giant. And the cities, they were terrifying. Kol ele arim bitzurot, choma gvoa, dlatayim uvriach. All these cities that were destroyed were fortified cities, with high walls and gates and bars. Why does Moses include all the detail about these stories? Do we really need to know the size and make of Og's bed? Let's look at one last story. Actually, the first one Moses brings in his speech. And I think this one will help us to put together the pieces. Moses opens with telling the nation about when he appointed new judges for them. He reminds them, Va'omar aleichem ba'etahi lemor. I said to you at this time, Lo uchal levadi se'eseschem. I can't carry you all alone anymore. Why not? Hashem Elokeichem hirba etchem v'hinchem hayom kekochvei hashamayim larov. Because God has multiplied you, and today you are like the stars in the sky. So Moses has a solution. Havu lachem anashim chachamim unevonim v'duim l'shivteichem. Pick for yourselves wise men, v'asimem beroshechem, and they'll judge you and share the burden with me. The original version of this story had happened back in Parshat Bahalotcha, but like the others, the original is told a little differently. The people had been complaining. They wanted new food. They were sick of man. And Moses just gives up on them. He says to God, Lama harayota lavadecha? Why have you done this evil to me, your servant? V'lama lo matzati chen be'inecha? And why haven't I found favor in your eyes? Lasumit masa kol ha'am hazeh alai, that you place this burden of the people on me. Lo uchal anochi levadi laseis es kol ha'am hazeh. I can't carry all this people by myself. Ki chaved mimeni, for it is too much for me. And God responds, okay, gather respected elders from amongst the tribes, v'nasu itcha b'masa ha'am, and they will share the burden of the people with you. V'lo tisa ata levadacha, and you shall not bear it alone. So why does Moses open his speech with this story? It definitely fails the inspirational test. Hey guys, remember that time when I was fed up with you? Also, it seems to fail the history test. Is this story of the judges so important that it needs to open up Moses' speech? The reason the judges story, and all of Devarim for that matter, is so confusing to us is because we're reading with the end in mind. We tend to read Sefer Devarim as Moses' wrap-up book, filled with repetitions and details that are an epilogue to the first 4 books. But that's because we know how this story ends. The people go into the land and build a successful kingdom. But there's one thing we're missing. This speech, it was given on the eve of the invasion of Canaan. The people, they were about to go to war. And if it were me in the crowd, I'd be terrified. God has been providing for them completely for 40 years. He's been vanquishing their foes in battle. But in Israel, that's not going to happen anymore. We're going to have to fight, conquer land. God's going to be with us, but he won't be as actively present. What will that look like? Will we have to do everything on our own? This speech was William Wallace in Braveheart. It was every major halftime locker room speech. Moses wasn't recapping anything. He was telling them, you can do this. He carefully selects his stories, each with a particular argument as to why the people should be courageous. He begins, remember when we appointed new judges? I know it seemed like I was mad, and it's true, I was frustrated. I couldn't handle you. But think about why you were too much for me to handle. Hashem Elokeichem hirba etchem, v'hinchem hayom kekochvei hashamayim larov. God has multiplied you, and today you are like the stars in the sky. Moses doesn't bring up that story to berate them. He brings it up to encourage them. What could have been remembered as a disheartening episode, a time that they were put down by their leader, Moses shows them that they were actually lifted up by the only leader that matters, their Father in heaven. Yes, you were too much for me, but what a blessing that you become too numerous for any one man to carry. I know you're scared. But remember, God follows through on his promises. He fulfilled the promise about making you a vast nation. He will also fulfill his promise to protect you in the land. He'll be with you the entire time. Then, Moses talks about the sin of the spies. Again, not to dishearten them, but to give them renewed courage. Israel is now in the exact same position, facing the exact same test as the generation of the spies. They're about to face the Canaanites, the very mighty nations their ancestors were terrified to confront. How can we do what they didn't have the courage to do? Moses recognizes that fear, understands that, and in this speech, addresses it. He isn't interested in telling them history. Instead, he takes them back in time and gives them the speech that they need to hear. Moses focuses on how God was with them and would continue to be with them. Remember, like I told your parents then, Hu yilachem lachem, God will fight for you, kechol asher asa itchem b'Mitzrayim le'einechem, just as he did for you in Egypt, before your very eyes. Uvamidbar asher ra'ita asher nisa'acha Hashem Elokecha, and in the desert, you've seen how God carried you. Kasher yisa ish et bno, like one carries his son. Bechol haderech asher halachtem, everywhere that you've gone. Ad boachem ad hamakom hazeh, all the way up until you got to this place. He has never abandoned you, and as you enter the land of Israel, know that he won't abandon you now. But you're still scared. Maybe God will be there with us, but we still have to conquer all of these nations. So now, Moses brings up Esav and Lot. Why does Moses tell us about this? Well, think about how these stories must have sounded to Israel. Remember your cousins, Lot and Esav? God promised them that they would receive an inheritance, and that promise came true. Now, it's your turn. Remember how years ago, mighty nations dwelled in those lands? Nations filled with Rephaim, Anakim, filled with giants. Esav and Lot were able to utterly obliterate them. How? Because God promised those lands to Esav and Lot, and God fulfills his promises. He conquered those lands for them, just like he'll help conquer the land he promised to you. The detailed stories of Sihon and Og now also make sense in this pep talk. Sihon and Og had been the leaders of strong, mighty nations. The cities were so fortified, and they were giants. Look at how huge Og's bed was. We had every reason to fear, and yet, with God's help, we utterly wiped them out. As if Moses is saying to them, hey, you've done this already. With God's help, you succeeded last time, and you will again. God is with you. Don't be afraid. Over and over, Moses is building them up, giving them courage. God has blessed you just like he promised. God is with you like he has been in Egypt and in the desert. God has given people land, and he's giving you this land. And with God's help, you have succeeded in miraculous military victories before, and you will again. In his speech, Moses retells specific stories in a way that highlights this particular message, that God will be with them in this next step. Even though God's presence won't be all around you, as it has been up until now, don't fear. He's right there, and he'll never leave you. Sefer Devarim is referred to by Chazal as Mishnah Torah, a book of repetition. But if we take it at face value as repetitive stories, then we lose its meaning. We are meant to read this book not to relive the story of the spies or of the judges, but to put ourselves in the shoes of a people who didn't know how it all would end. We're meant to draw courage from the miracles of our past and draw strength from God's promises about our future. When we as a people don't know the end of our own story, will we draw strength and maintain our own faith? Join us as we continue to explore Mishnah Torah next week on The Parsha Experiment.